Hi, anyone and everyone. Welcome to Have You Heard About This Case? My name is Sam.
And my name is Kelly.
Today's case is pretty well known, but it's really baffling. So, we'll be talking about the disappearance of Andrew Gosden. But before we get into today's case, what is our intro question for today?
Okay, so in our timeline, we are recording today in the morning, which is actually pretty nice. I get like some good sun on my desk, but it also for me means the AM dog walk. So we know that we love our furry little co hosts, and I was wondering what lately has your furry co host, Rigby, done that's made you laugh? Or like what new habit has he picked up?
Oh, he is hilarious every day. He's just weird. He has such a bizarre personality. This morning I gave him some catnip. He unfortunately cut his chin yesterday.
Oh,
I think on his own nail. It's like this little
oh,
tiny,
Rigby.
tiny cut on the bottom of his chin. But
Oh,
I had to clean it
Rigby.
up this morning, so he was very angry with me
Oh,
having to get a wet towel and like clean off the little bit of blood.
oh
Um,
no.
so I gave him a good pile of catnip after he was a very good boy and let me do that. Um, and he just spent a good 20 minutes just rolling on the floor, and it was adorable.
Oh my god, the little tummies are my favorite.
Yeah, and he's for anyone who hasn't seen a picture of him on our Instagram, um, his whole chin all the way down to his stomach is white.
I think I'll
So it's
I'll
like,
ask you for social media for this one for like a new picture.
yeah, I
I
can
do
give you
have
some.
I have his headshot that I often use whenever we talk about them, but maybe we can find one of him with his little belly or something.
Oh, I'm sure. It's special if you get to see his white belly because he doesn't show it to everyone.
No. No. He started out so shy. And now he's just
Yeah,
got the funniest little
he's so
personality.
funny. Yeah, he was a rescue who was very scared, and now he's just flat out goofy. He's great.
Yeah. He comes right out now when you go over. It used to be he wouldn't
Mm-hmm.
even come out even if you had food.
Oh, he is not food motivated. That's why, like, I didn't give him treats this morning because he does not care about that. Again, he's a weird cat. He's a weird boy.
He's like, I don't want your food. I want your, I guess, catnip.
I'll say catnip's still kind of food, but it's different.
Almost. Do they eat it? Do you know? Or do they just
He
like
does eat it. It depends. It depends on the cat, really.
okay, okay.
Rigby will eat it and roll in it. So he'll
Okay.
like want to get the scent on him. Um, which I think is most common for a lot of cats, but some cats just
Okay.
prefer to roll in it. Some prefer to eat it.
Okay. So yeah, I never knew I'm not a cat person as some of you might know. We have one of each little furry co-hosts. I have a dog and I've always been a dog person. So I wasn't aware of I knew you can grow catnip yourself.
Hmm.
Like it's a
Yeah,
plant.
and I debate that. But I've known friends who have done that for their cats, and their cat like just gets it in one go. Like they'll have it up on like the windowsill in the kitchen to get it
Mhm.
away from the cat, and the cat will find a way to
Right.
get it and just eat it all at
Oh
once.
no.
And it's like,
Oh
no,
no.
now, like, I need to grow a whole new one for you to repeat
Right.
that.
Right. You're like, now I have no catnip plant and I have a cat that is so messed up on catnip. I don't even know what to do about it.
He has gotten into a bag of catnip before where he knocked it off the shelf and
Oh
opened
yeah.
it.
Oh
And I
my
woke up
god.
in the middle of the night to catnip covering the floor. And he's
Oh
just like zonked out on the couch.
oh my god, he's like, this is the best day ever. And you're
I was
like, this
not
is the
happy coming in the morning to that.
I was gonna say, you're like, this is the worst day ever. And he's like, Mom, what are you talking about? This is the best day.
Yeah, he had a good day.
Yeah, he had a great day. You were like, great, I get to clean up catnip all day.
Right. What does Arthur do?
Arthur is a funny little dude, too. He's a full on pandemic puppy. We got him in 2020. So he doesn't really know how to behave around other dogs. But he loves people. He's obsessed with them. So I just took him on the walk, and he's always trying to get past the dog to the person so he can get their people attention. But today we met a tiny baby puppy on our way coming back in the building. This thing was so small. It looked
Aw.
like I know, I didn't know how this man even found a collar to fit it. It had to have been only about like 6 weeks old. Very small puppy. And Arthur was thrilled by this puppy. I think he was just juiced that he found a dog that's smaller than him
Oh,
because
yeah, because he's pretty small.
yeah, Arthur's a low rider. He's deceptive. He's long. He's not very tall. We thought that he's a. We got him from a foster to adopt, and all they told us was that the mom was a Shih Tzu. And my best friend works in rescues. She has her whole career and with all kinds of dogs. And I sent her a picture. I was like, we finally got him. Oh my God, it's the best day of my life. It was. And she asks me, okay, so, what kind of dog is it? And I was like, well, all they would tell us was it was a Shih Tzu. Its mom was a Shih Tzu, and I took a picture of Arthur, and I sent it to Brittany, and she said, yeah, that is not a Shih Tzu. Be ready for that thing to get as big as it gets. She's like, there's no way. They're like, and
Yeah,
it's
when
funny.
you said the same thing to me, I'm like, I'm not a huge like I know dogs a little bit. I grew up with dogs, but that's not a Shih Tzu.
Right.
Like,
Right. When you
nah.
see him, no. You see him and you're like, okay, it wasn't a purebred Shih Tzu. Whatever
Right?
kind of Shih Tzu you guys
He's
found.
cute,
He's
but
very
definitely not 100% Shih Tzu.
No. Oh God, no. If I had a nickel for every time somebody asked me what kind of dog Arthur was, we would fund this whole podcast based
Right.
solely on just nickels from people. The most often that I get is, I don't know, Sam, if you've ever seen The Never Ending Story, but
Yep.
it
I
it
was
makes it
terrified of it as a kid.
well, it makes it funnier for me because I've never seen it. Because everybody comes up to me and they're like, it looks like the thing, the dragon thing. That I think its
He
name
kind of
is.
does.
Its
I don't
name is
remember
like.
his name.
I think its name is like Falcor or something. People say it to me all
Oh,
the time.
that sounds right.
It sounds right, right? People say it to me all the time, but because I haven't seen the movie, I'm like, that doesn't mean anything to me. But one time I had a lady who was a city of Chicago traffic employee, and she's got a guy up in a cherry picker trimming back one of the trees to get it away from the street light. And she's trying to put up a sign that says, like, one lane, like, go around this guy, right? And this guy's already up there, and she's putting out the sign, and she stops putting out the sign to yell to me from the sidewalk to the park, oh my God, that dog is so cute. What kind is it? And I was like, I just yelled back, thank you, I don't know. But I was just thinking, like, ma'am, shouldn't you be putting up that sign? Like, that man is already in the cherry picker. Like,
Right.
put up the sign. Like, I know, like, I would be pleased to let you pet him, but first, you should put up the sign for traffic.
Right? Like, I'd like you to do your job and then sure.
Right, just to make sure. I'm just trying to make sure that nothing happens to this man in the cherry picker that already has probably like a power tool to cut back the tree. But
Right.
always, the morning walk is always, I never know what's going to happen. I just get ready.
All right, well, let's go ahead and dive into today's case.
All right.
And as I mentioned, it's a pretty well-known case, but it's very much still a mystery. And I know right before we hit record, you said that the name's kind of familiar. I have the
So
feeling that you have heard of his case before.
I may have the last name in this case kind of pings for me. So it's probably something that I've like read an article about in passing. You and I both read so many articles, so many stories,
Hmm.
all for the podcast. So I'm sure I've heard this last name before, but I definitely need to hear the details.
Yeah, it was in the news just a couple years ago, and we'll get to
Oh,
that. I don't want to
okay.
give any of those details away, but there was something that happened a couple of years ago that brought
Mm-hmm.
it back into the news.
Okay,
Um,
that could have been when I
so
encountered
you
it.
could have easily read it at that point.
Okay.
So Andrew Gosden was born on July 10th, 1993, to parents
Mm.
Glenn Gosden and to parents Kevin Gosden and Glennis Gosden.
Oh, I'm sorry. I
And
reacted to that because 93, that's the same year my little brother was born, and that's the same first name as my dad. That that's
oh
so
yeah.
young. That's so young.
Mhm.
93. I'm sorry. Go on. Glennis and
Yeah.
Kevin had Andrew.
And Andrew was the youngest in the family. He had a sister, Charlotte, who was 2 years older than him, but it was just the four of them.
Mm. Mm.
And they lived in Doncaster, South Yorkshire, in England.
Okay.
And this is
Okay.
about 170 miles north of London, just to kind of give you a visual, because I know that you
Okay.
know
Yes.
England decently well.
Oh, only okay. You know it much better than myself because I went south when I was there. So this South Yorkshire, England isn't that big, so 170 miles north of London, that would put it pretty far north, right?
Yeah, it's like northeast
Okay. Okay.
in
Okay.
England.
All right. South Yorkshire.
And Andrew's parents describe him as a quote home bird, and they say that he was incredibly intelligent. So he wasn't too much of an adventurer. He very much kind of stayed at home. They said it. His dad said in some article that would he had a lot of friends at school, but he never really hung out with those friends outside of school. He
See,
preferred to come home and kind of be on his own.
See, I get that. I get that because
Me too.
also I love the London kind of slang there, a home bird instead of I think in America it's kind of more called a homebody. Like
Hmm.
you kind of like to stay at home, and I totally get that. It's just the parallels
Me too.
between this and my younger brother are wild because
I think they're gonna get a little more similar coming up here
my yeah,
with what I know.
my younger brother had a lot of friends at school too, but he was also just very intelligent and liked to stay home.
Hmm. Yeah, I've never met your brother, but there seems to be a lot of similarities from the things that you've told me between him and
Mm-hmm.
Andrew.
Mm-hmm.
And one of his favorite things was really just learning and going to museums. And this kind of fit in well with his schoolwork because he was actually involved in a program at school that was only the top 5% of students were allowed into. So
Oh
he's
wow.
incredibly smart.
Very smart, yeah. Especially in a good location too to visit museums if you're in England. It's just
Hmm.
I recently took my first trip there. Sam has spent more time there than I have, but I just, it's a much older country than ours is, and you just kind
Hmm.
of feel
Yeah.
that when you're there.
You can learn a lot more about history by just walking around the streets in a place
Oh,
like England
yeah.
versus a place like Chicago. Like
Oh,
it's
yeah.
so incredibly different to be in each place.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It was a very different feeling because I just remember, being that Andrew loved to learn, it reminds me of we only had so much time in London when we were there. We had 4 days because our flight got canceled. So me and my
Right,
father
and
in
that's
law,
not enough time at
no,
all.
not enough time at all. But my father-in-law is actually a native. He was born in England, and when he moved to America, with his mother and father. His mother was English, but my father-in-law joined the service. So when you join the service, you have to renounce all other citizenships except for your American. So my father-in-law he was technically a an English citizen, and you can just be running down the streets. We were trying to get to the British Museum, which you can't even do in 4 days, but we're trying to get there for the lightning tour, and all of a sudden you're walking on a street that's just made of cobblestones.
Oh yeah. Yeah, definitely. It's just all over. Even
Yeah.
when I was there, when I was studying, because I took classes in London, and my classes were literally out on the street because I was studying architecture. And it's like, okay, we're going to show up at this
Yeah.
building and then we'll have a lecture.
What a
Um,
good idea.
that was so much fun.
Oh my God, that must have
But
been awesome for your
yeah, no, it was
education.
incredible.
That's very
I will.
cool.
My abroad trip was very special to me.
That's a
Um,
very cool experience.
yeah, but with Andrew, like you said, being there and just kind of helped fuel his love of all of that and just learning in general. And according to a Vice article, some of his teachers believed that at age 14, he would have been a shoo-in for Cambridge,
Oh
which is
wow.
that's a big deal.
At 14? How would
Yeah,
you equate Cambridge? Is that like an Ivy League
I think that's
English?
Ivy for sure.
Okay, that's sort of equivalent to Ivy League but British.
Yeah, I think like Cambridge and Oxford are like Harvard
Yeah.
and Yale.
Okay, that makes perfect sense. Because I've heard it used before, Cambridge, as like a very
Very prestigious.
distinct, yes, very prestigious school. 14, wow.
And right. Andrew's parents raised both of their kids to be comfortable with self expression. They wanted them to be able to make their own educated decisions based on what they wanted and did try to influence them the least amount possible. And Andrew was very into early 2000s rock, metal, mainly
Yes.
Slipknot, Marilyn Manson. And
Oh.
Charlotte fully embraced her goth aesthetic. She decorated her whole room black, fully dressed in black, dyed her hair black,
You
and
knew.
parents thought that this was just important to let your kids go through this and make these
Oh.
decisions on their own.
You must have known writing that how much I would love that. I love every part
Right?
of that. I love every
Well, I
part
feel
of
like my
that.
parents did the same thing with me and my sister, and it's just like I agree. I think that that's a good way to go.
I think it's really smart that they were able to recognize, like, hey, listen, we've got a couple really smart kids that we raised ourselves. We feel comfortable with their knowledge and however it is they want to present themselves. That's okay because their intelligence and their upbringing speaks for itself. I think that's pretty cool.
Yeah. And even it went as far as they didn't want to introduce their religion to their kids. They both were Christian and they both were pretty into their religion. They were
Oh.
raised to be religious, but they made the decision to not impose their own views onto their kids. So they went to church
Okay.
as younger kids. They did go, but the moment they asked not to go to church anymore, the parents like, okay, that's fine. Like,
Okay.
you don't want it. We're not gonna
That's
we're not gonna force you.
that's another thing that's very cool. That's another very enlightened parenting decision, in my opinion, because you're not forcing your beliefs on your children. You're
Yeah.
like, okay, this brings me comfort, this brings me joy. I was raised this way and I like it. However, we've chosen to raise you in our own way, one that's very open for you to make your own decisions. So that's pretty
Exactly.
cool because parents are not, even though this is like 2000s. I think that parents are still pretty strict on keeping their children in their religion.
Yeah, it's fairly common. to raise your kids in whatever religion. But I also do think at the same time, there's been such a shift on multi-religious families that
You're right.
a lot of people are celebrating multiple religions, or they get to choose which religion they want to follow, things like that. So I think times are changing. I think this was kind of the start of times are changing in the early 2000s.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Because we're talking early 2000s. Yeah. And my parents were similar. You guys may have surmised from Danny Green episode, if you've listened to it. I believe that I mentioned on there that my father was raised very Catholic. And when my father had my little brother and I, he made it clear that he was no longer interested in certain aspects of Catholicism and preferred Patrick and I. Patrick is my little brother. Hey, Pat. And he preferred us to be raised in a different religion, and my mother was Episcopalian, which is Catholicism's like ugly stepsister. They do not like us at all because it's basically Catholicism only without the confessional, and women and married people can be priests. So the Catholic Church doesn't like that at all, but it was much more like it wasn't as restrictive as the Catholicism that my dad grew up under. And that was early 2000s too. So,
Right. But it kind of, once you kind of hear their careers, I think their attitude on raising their kids potentially makes a bit more sense. They were both speech therapists, so they were
okay.
very in tune with being able to read body language and being able to really help people with their speech and being able to
Right.
convey what they're trying to say when it might be a struggle for them. So
Yeah.
they
Yeah.
use that in parenting, and they use that to help their kids, which seemingly was very successful in
Yeah.
the way that they chose to use it.
Yeah. That's incredible, just to be able to pick up on someone's bodily cues. I'm sure that as we go on and as we hear more about this story, they may pick up some things from Andrew, or in hindsight, they may pick up some things from Andrew. I'm sure we'll find out.
Yeah, and kind of as you said earlier, both of the kids are incredibly intelligent and both tested very highly in school, and they felt it was important that they also had the ability to express themselves comfortably, even though like we can look back at that time period and being into Slipknot and Marilyn Manson and the whole goth aesthetic, that was not popular. You were kind
Mm,
of looked down on a lot of the time being into that sort of thing. So
absolutely.
it being
Absolutely.
allowing your kids to fully express that, even though you know your kids are probably going to be looked at oddly, that I think that's really important.
I do
And
too.
I think I value that in their parenting.
I
So,
agree. I
kind of
think
with
that's
all of
awesome.
this, yeah, with all of this, by all accounts, it seems like they had a really great household.
Yeah, like
And
a really great dynamic.
so let's jump ahead a little bit. On the morning of Friday, September 14th, in 2007, Glennis went to wake up Andrew in the morning for school, and this actually wasn't typical. He would usually wake up on his own, and she said when she woke him up, he was not in a good mood, and he quote woke up on the wrong side of the bed.
Hmm.
And like I said, it isn't often that he would sleep in. He'd usually wake up on his own, at least on a school day.
Hmm.
But Glennis didn't really think anything of it. He's a 14-year-old
Sure.
boy.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah, yeah. They don't always wake
every once
up.
in a while, you're not going to have a good day.
Yeah,
And
if I were a parent, I imagine that that would happen even more frequently than.
yeah, but also, like, within 30 minutes, Andrew was up. He was dressed in his school uniform, and he was ready to walk out the door and go to school.
Hmm? Okay.
So
See there.
nothing seemed wrong.
Right, yeah, nothing amiss so far.
So let's jump ahead just a little bit. to after work for Glennis and Kevin that same day.
Mm-hmm.
They come home. Everything very much seemed normal. Typically, Charlotte and Andrew, they arrive home from school a little bit before Glennis and Kevin. And they both kind of just usually do their own thing. Charlotte had recently gotten a new laptop, so she was actually just in her bedroom using it. And basically every day what Andrew would do is he'd go down to this kind of cellar basement that his dad had converted into like a gaming room. And he'd go and sit down and play video games until dinner.
Oh man, he's just like a normal average boy.
He's a 14-year-old. Yeah.
Oh man, yeah, 14. Oh, man, at 14, my little brother could beat any video game ever invented.
Yeah, and it sounded like Andrew was really into video games.
Yeah.
So it comes time when it's dinner. So Glennis asks Charlotte to call Andrew to come to the dinner table. But Charlotte couldn't find him. And the family discovers that he actually wasn't in the house.
Okay.
And so obviously this is odd. They immediately start calling friends of his. They call the school. And they discover pretty quickly that Andrew actually hadn't been at school at all that day.
Oh, no.
And this obviously confuses his parents because they saw him leave for school in his school uniform.
Right.
But one thing that's super odd is his uniform was in the house. They saw it after work.
Wow.
Which is a big reason they just assumed he was downstairs playing video games.
Right, and had changed out of his school clothes and went to go play video games. That's
the typical
weird.
routine for the Gosden kids as they would get home from school is they would immediately take off their uniforms. They'd usually hang the jacket up. And in this case, Andrew's jacket was hanging off the back of a chair in his bedroom, just kind of neatly hanging. And especially because this was Friday, they come home and they immediately toss their school uniforms into the washer.
Sure.
And it gets washed over the weekend, ready for Monday. That's exactly where Andrew's clothes were. His jacket was on the chair, hanging neatly, and his shirt and his pants from what he was wearing that morning were actually in the wash machine. So it's like he came home just like any normal Friday.
Yeah. Got rid of his uniform and did the normal tasks of it.
Exactly.
You know, getting it washed, getting it ready.
So Charlotte says in a BBC article that those moments after they discovered Andrew was gone was incredibly frantic.
God,
they initially were thinking like maybe something happened on the way to school, but then quickly realizing like, oh no, yeah, we saw his clothes. So he came home at some point, so that's not possible.
Right.
And so Andrew's parents just immediately contact the police.
Yeah.
And the police get on this right away. They do think that it's not just like your typical runaway scenario where they're like, wait a couple days, he'll be back. They get him on the news. They are trying to figure out what's going on.
Good.
But unfortunately, it would be a couple days later that they actually get any sort of information.
Wow. So like his image was out there for like a couple days before they got like a tip, or were do you think they were holding it back? Okay.
No, it was a couple days. So Andrew disappears on Friday. And it wasn't until the following Tuesday that a woman saw him on the news and realized that she had information, and she came forward to say what she remembers. Okay. And she worked at the local train station, and she said that she saw Andrew that Friday. She says that she actually sold him a one-way ticket to London, and really specifically remembers him for two reasons. First, because he looked so young, and he was 14, but he was very small for his age. He was 5'3". And on all the missing posters, they don't list his weight. They just list him as slim. But he was very small for his age.
So slight, yeah. I relate, Andrew. But yeah, it does make you look quite young, and I imagine that this lady remembered it very well.
Well, the other reason she specifically remembered it, which I think is even more bizarre, is that she tried to upsell him on a round trip ticket because for
Mm-hmm.
only £1 more, he'd be able to receive that return ticket from London to
Mm-hmm.
Doncaster.
Right.
So for £1, that's totally worth
Yeah.
purchasing the round trip if you have the intentions on coming back at any point. Because a lot of those
Mm-hmm.
times, those tickets aren't timed. So it's like you
Mm-hmm.
have
Okay.
a return ticket, you can do it within like the day or a couple of days, but it's not
Oh,
like
okay.
return at 5 p.m. at this time. It's when
Oh,
you
okay.
choose to use it.
So this is actually a really good. I mean, I know this is unrelated to the story, but that's actually a really good deal. I never took the train when I
Yeah.
was in England, but yeah, just £1 more, you can come back sort of in the general area of when you left,
Mm-hmm.
and and yet he
He specifically said no. He wanted the one-way ticket. And that's why the
that
woman's like, this was weird. Like a
weird.
young kid
Yes, yes,
choosing a
traveling.
one-way.
Right, traveling alone, most likely. Who knows? I don't know at this point the details. But yeah, that is odd because again, it's such a good deal. Like you
Mm-hmm.
would think if he was trying to, I mean, he's only 14, so maybe he doesn't have this kind of like cognitive. But he's
He's
very
a
intelligent.
brilliant kid, though. Yeah.
Brilliant. Yeah, bound for Cambridge, they thought at just 14. You would think he would have bought the round trip and just never used the return
If
if
he
he
felt
didn't
like,
intend on coming back.
well, we'll talk about this later because this
Okay.
kind of will
Getting ahead of
mesh
myself.
into the theories.
Okay.
Um, but the question is, why would he not want the round trip?
Right.
So we'll bring that back up later.
Right. But
Um,
right now we're only just discovering this woman is saying, hey, this was weird. And it is weird.
exactly. So we know he went to London based on
Okay.
the fact that he purchased this ticket. So I get now there's the
Sure.
question of like, did he actually get there? And in this meantime, Andrew's family is just trying to find any additional details about his disappearance. And
Hmm.
they discovered that he withdrew £200 from his bank account. And his bank
Wow.
account had $214 in it. So he
Oh,
basically pulled
wow.
out the maximum from an ATM that he could have.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. Okay.
And then they were also able to determine that after he left home that morning for school, he actually went to a nearby park where he waited for his family to leave, went home, changed out of his school uniform. He put
Oh.
on jeans and his favorite Slipknot t-shirt. He
Uh-huh.
grabbed his messenger bag, which is just like a black shoulder
Hmm.
bag,
Sure.
and inside of his black shoulder bag, he had his PSP, his portable PlayStation, but he had left his charger behind.
So he has the PSP. Do we did we get this description of what he was wearing from the lady who sold him the ticket? Or did the cops find out during the investigation? Do you know?
I do know. I'm not going to tell you yet.
Okay, okay, sorry.
I think
Again,
there's
jumping
actually a
ahead.
couple reasons that we know. I think the parents probably figured it out, knowing it wasn't
Mm-hmm.
home, because it's described
Mm-hmm.
that this is like one of his favorite T-shirts.
Okay.
So I
And
think
the
that there's a good
PSP.
possibility the parents were aware that it wasn't there.
Right, yeah, they could have checked in it, seen it was missing. And then I'm sure they would have
Hmm.
noticed too that an electronic like the PSP was missing. Because I remember
Yeah.
PSPs, those things weren't cheap. Those were like the early,
Right.
that was like the PSP walked so that the Switch could run.
Yeah, it was like the upgrade from the Game Boy.
It
Um,
was.
but there was
But
two
no
different consoles.
charger.
But yeah.
Yeah.
And I was actually talking to a friend of mine. Well, actually, I'm going to bring this up later. I'm not going to bring this up yet. This is
Okay.
more for theories.
But
Ignore that.
he left his charger.
Um,
Either way, he leaves the charger for the PSP.
Yes.
You
And
said.
who knows
Okay.
if that's purposeful or not. It could have just
Yeah.
been like not thinking
Oops.
about it.
Yeah, I've done it. We've all done it.
Oh yeah. So we've all done it. And from the sound of it, he didn't have a cell phone. And to me, this is not at all surprising. We've talked about this. It's 2007. I got
Yeah.
my first cell phone in 2005, and I was like the first of my friends to get a cell phone. No surprise to me that he didn't have one.
Yeah, I got mine when I turned about 16 as well because I started doing extracurriculars after school.
Yeah, like
And
to me, it's just it's not weird.
it sounds
By
like
any means.
Andrew, yeah, it sounds like Andrew might have been too young yet to start maybe some extracurriculars.
Well,
And
not
so
even
maybe
too
there
young.
was,
It's just like 14's young to have a cell phone
it's
at
young,
that
yeah.
time. Like
Yeah,
being
at
16,
2007.
getting our cell phones was like a big deal. Like we were
It was
16
it
to
was
get
a
them.
huge
So
deal.
I think it's something that we can just kind of blow past. A lot of people bring it
Yeah.
up, which is just why I'm mentioning it. So Andrew's parents say that he is quite familiar with London because he has relatives who live there. And
Okay.
the Gosden family would often visit London. A lot of this was because obviously going to visit relatives, but as a family, they loved the museums just like Andrew did. And so they were there quite a bit from the sound of it. I would assume every couple of months. That's just
Yeah.
my assumption based on living in a different area as my extended family. That's kind of how I was.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. I would say I make it home, every couple of few months to visit my relatives there. So, I would guess around the same. And if you like it a lot there, maybe a little more, like you said, maybe every couple months.
Yeah. So they even immediately told police that they believe that this could have actually been where he wanted to go, was going to
Oh,
London, potentially to visit family, but more specifically because of museums, because they knew it was one of his favorite places. So this was even
right.
before the person who worked at the train station had come forward and
Oh,
said,
wow.
and so like they immediately, the family was like, we know our son. He
Yeah,
loves it there.
I was going to say they know their son. They know their son.
Yeah, but there wasn't really anything to investigate until the employee had come forward. Like they could inform London police being like, "Hey, we have a missing kid.
Sure.
There might
Yeah.
be a potential he's there, but other than sending a photo, what can you really do?"
Right.
So now
Right.
the family has the information that Andrew withdrew the couple £100 and that he is indeed making his way to London. So the search transitioned officially from Doncaster to London, but unfortunately, it would be another 24 days until they discovered anything new.
Wow. That poor family.
Yeah, this is the frustrating part.
I
There's a
feel
lot of
so
times where it's like
bad.
the police are kind of doing like exactly what they need to, but they
Right.
just don't have a whole lot to work with. This is the one part that's quite frustrating when it involves the police. So this
Yeah.
is a total of 27 days after Andrew had skipped school, left home.
Oh.
They found footage from the King's Cross tube station in London that
Oh,
was
okay.
released of
Okay.
Andrew walking out of the station. And
Okay.
so,
Okay.
for those of you, we know we have a lot of Chicago listeners. This is comparable to like Ogilvy for Chicago listeners. All the
Okay.
trains from the
Okay.
different areas from across the state kind of come together in one station centrally.
Okay.
King's Cross is essentially that.
Okay,
It connects
thank you.
to the normal tube, but yeah, all the main
Right.
trains
Okay.
kind of meet at King's Cross.
So
It's a big transfer point.
this is sort of like their loop station,
Um,
kind of.
no, kind of.
More
When you're talking to Metra, yeah.
okay, Metro. Okay, okay.
But
I'm
it
one of
also
our-
connects to the tube.
Okay, I'm one of our ignorant Chicago listeners because when we were in London, we did not take the tube, which next time we will be because I want to go and ride it. But that helps me place myself in where he arrives.
Yeah, like there were a lot of times for me, like I didn't live near King's Cross, but I was always in King's Cross because it's where you transfer, like for us it would be transferring L lines
Yep.
But it's like they all go there. So at some
Okay.
point, you're going to end up in King's Cross if you need to get across the city.
Right. All
And then
roads
obviously
lead.
the outer train lines that spread outside of London and go to the suburbs and the rest of
Okay.
the country.
Okay.
But
And so
um,
we find footage. He made it there
he
to
made it
King's
there. So he
Cross.
took the train from Doncaster to King's Cross, which sounds like there was no transfers that he would have needed to take. And then there was the footage of him actually walking out of King's Cross. And I'm not sure how easy it is for you to pull up the social media folder for this episode in our drive, but I it might be beneficial for you to glance at the photos because they're all in there. If you just
Great.
want to quickly open that,
Yeah.
because you should get a sense of how small he really looks. He
Okay.
looks like a
Let's-
very small 14-year-old boy.
Oh, wow. Okay, yeah, he is very small. He's just
Yeah, like it looks
not,
like he probably would hit a growth spurt within the next year
Yeah.
or two, but he just
Yes.
hasn't gotten it yet.
Yes, so like for all y'all, we will post this on social media, but he just looks kind of like your normal teenager who might end up a little short, which is okay, so did I. But you can kind of see in his hands and in his ears and stuff that he's about to kind of shoot up a little bit. But he's still very thin. I do see why they described him as slim, because he's very
Yes.
slim. Also, this picture is just so, it hurts my heart. He even looks a little bit like my younger brother. Like,
Yeah, I've never even seen a picture of your brother, but he does, from what you've described about him, he does remind me of him.
yeah, he even looks a little like him. But yeah, so we have, and that's actually, I mean, I'm glad King's Cross had cameras, you know?
Well, so the reason why this is so upsetting, that this is 27 days later,
Yeah.
is because the footage is commonly cleared and recorded over after 28 days. So
Oh my God.
there's very, very little time to follow up. So they're going to struggle to find a path and continue to trace a path for him because within 24 hours, all of the cameras that they would need to review this footage will be cleared.
No.
So it's like they need to race to try to find more, and hopefully they will in 24 hours.
Exactly. I was going to say they
Which-
have like 24 hours. Oh no. Oh,
So
boy.
unfortunately, that's where the video footage ends.
Oh,
right there.
damn it. Well,
There are, I didn't,
2007.
yeah.
But
So there is a
damn.
report, I didn't put it in my script, that he was potentially at a Pizza Hut restaurant at some point that afternoon. That is based on eyewitnesses, so
Okay.
take it with a grain of salt.
Right, exactly.
A lot of news reports didn't even report this sighting, but I did at one point find a quote from Kevin who says that, like, yeah, someone thinks they saw him, but we don't
Okay.
know.
Okay.
But that's honestly the end of the sightings,
Oh my God.
at least the confirmed sightings. So just like the States, the UK has multiple different types of emergency alerts. We have most commonly the Amber Alert. We also have the Silver Alert, Purple Alert, Blue
Yeah.
Alert, for all different sorts of instances. And the UK has a Child Abduction Alert, which
Okay.
is kind of the most equivalent to an Amber Alert. The biggest difference is that in the UK, it is an opt-in system versus an opt-out system. So if you want to be notified for any of these alerts, you actually have to sign up for the notifications. Where
Oh.
here in the States, you need to turn them off if you do not want them.
Yeah.
Which, please never turn them off. Just leave them
Don't.
on.
Yes. Oh my God. Fully endorse
I don't
what
like
Sam
that you
just
can
said.
turn them off.
Fully endorse what Sam just said. Do not turn them off. You never know. I just remember one time at the job Sam and I worked together
Mm-hmm.
I was in one of the particular rooms. We worked at a museum type exhibit, and it was very large. And one of the rooms was a small theater, and an Amber Alert came through. So we heard one phone go. And the thing is, even if your phone is on silent and stuff,
Yeah, it still
the Amber
goes, which
Alerts
it's
here
worth it.
will,
Just give it the minute
yeah.
and look at it, read
And
it, and move on if you
yes,
have no way of helping.
right, because
That's it.
it was like a chorus of phones. Everybody's phone started going off, like Amber Alert, Amber Alert, Amber Alert. So many that we had to pause the show, and we restarted it after everybody had been able to like check their phone, clear it, be like, I don't know this child, and also I'm in the middle of an exhibit. I have no way of finding this child. So that surprises me that it's opt in there.
Yeah, me too. And I don't like it.
I don't like it either.
But the UK has another alert system called the Child Rescue Act. And like as we know, like with the Amber Alert, there's a lot of really, really strict stipulations that
Mhm.
need to be met before an Amber Alert is allowed to be released. And
Yes.
I don't remember them all off the top of my head. I don't have them in my notes here. But
Hmm.
that's why we have
But you're
different
right.
other alerts, because
You're
if
right.
one
Yeah.
doesn't
Hmm.
fit these specific standards, it might fit another one where they can still get help, but you're looking at
Yes.
just different things within that missing person's kind of case that you need to check out. So
Absolutely.
the
Yeah. Yeah.
second alert
And
system is the Child Rescue Act.
hmm.
And this was very new at the time of Andrew's disappearance. According to the
Hmm.
Telegraph, it had only been used 3 or 4 times before his disappearance. So,
Mm. Hmm.
very new
Yeah,
to
that
their
is really new.
emergency systems. And the
Hmm.
criteria for this alert in particular is the child is under the age of 18 years old.
Hmm.
So, child.
Yep. Same as
That
Amber Alert. Yeah.
Yep, that there is a real and immediate risk to life,
Oh no.
and that there is sufficient information available to enable the public to assist police in locating the child. So, given those three criteria, to
Hmm.
me, sure seems like the Child Rescue Act is a great tool to help the public be informed of Andrew. But
Yes.
unfortunately, there was a lot of debate on whether Andrew's
Okay.
disappearance fits all of this, specifically when it comes to number two, the real and immediate risk to life.
Hmm.
He seemingly left of his own accord. So,
Yeah.
like,
Uh,
yes, there's a risk because he is not home, but do we
yeah.
know for sure that he is in danger?
Yeah. I hate to be like that devil's advocate person because the devil doesn't need any more advocates. Let me just say that. But I do understand why some people are saying there is the potential there's no risk to his life. But I would argue the fact that he is 14 and alone and unaccompanied is sufficient to an immediate risk to life. I mean, he could absolutely be abducted. He could be, I mean, anything could happen to a 14-year-old. In London, it's a big
Yeah.
city.
Yeah, but it's there's no proof. And that's the
Yes.
what they need is they need,
Right.
like, if they were going in front of the court, here's the
Hmm.
evidence.
Hmm.
Um
Right. Right.
so being that he's 14 and there is a potential risk, that's like
Hmm.
circumstantial. So
Right.
unfortunately, there would be no alert for Andrew.
Oh,
So let's
I
kind of
hate
jump
that.
back.
Hmm.
Yeah. Let's jump back to kind of what we know.
Okay.
Andrew skipped school. He snuck home after everyone left, changed clothes, grabbed a couple of items, mainly his PSP with no charging cable. He withdrew 200 pounds from his bank account and got himself a one-way ticket to London. So here's where we're going to dive into why. Why
Yeah.
would he do this?
Yeah.
And honestly, there's no real clear answer to why.
Ah. Uh-huh.
What we know is that Andrew seemingly made very conscious decisions to do all of those things.
Mm-hmm.
So why would he want to go to London alone without mentioning it to anyone?
Yeah.
Eh, like, I don't know.
Yeah.
But one of the biggest theories, and I kind of get it, but I also truly don't all at the same time, is that Andrew wanted to go to a concert.
How did I
Andrew
know?
loved
I
he loved music,
I
and
kn- I'm sorry. I knew. I for some reason I felt when you told me to look at the picture of him, and again we'll post it on Instagram. But he is wearing a shirt that says System of a Down on it, and I was like, I wonder if there was anyone playing in London, maybe because you mentioned that a lot of his interests were in music. His favorite shirt was a Slipknot shirt. I was like, I wonder, maybe that's it. I don't
yeah,
know. But tell me more. I'm
that's
sure.
definitely one of the biggest theories.
Hmm.
Because of that love of music, he was allowed to go to shows, but
Hmm.
typically he would go to the shows with his dad.
Sure.
And this was something that his dad's like, I really don't care about the music, but
Right.
he loved
Right.
seeing Andrew enjoy it so much that he was willing
Oh.
to go with him. And
Yeah.
they
Yeah.
would go see bands that Andrew specifically wanted to see. Again, his dad's just kind of like whatever.
Mm.
But
Doing the
like not
dad
long
thing.
before, before he disappeared, they went and saw Muse together. Which honestly, I've never
Oh,
seen Muse. I would love to see that show.
I
Um,
agree.
but like I think that was the first like really big concert Andrew had gone to, and
Okay.
he just fell in love with it.
Okay. And
And
you said this happened not too long before he disappeared. They saw
like
this
a
show.
few months, it sounds like. Yeah.
Okay, so a significant amount of time, but I mean, a
Yeah.
Muse show, you don't really forget that too quick. I bet.
Yeah, especially when it's like your first like really big show, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
the
Yeah, I haven't
weekend
forgotten my
that
first really big show.
what?
Oh, I
Okay.
was gonna say I
Oh yeah,
haven't
I was
forgotten my first really big show, and I know my dad had to see Avril Lavigne twice. My poor
Yeah,
dad.
we my first show was the same age with my friend and her dad. So yeah, this is kind of like the normal trajectory I feel like for a lot of kids. But the weekend
Yeah.
that he disappeared, 30 Seconds to
Hmm.
Mars was performing in London.
Oh.
I actually think it was the
Okay.
night he disappeared. And then
Oh.
is it
Okay.
is it HIM or is it him? I never know.
That's a very good question. I never know either because I
I think it's
never was a big
HIM.
listener.
Yeah, me
I would
either.
say HIM. I would say HIM.
All
Sorry,
right. So
HIM or him listeners, but I was more of a 30
yeah,
Seconds to
I don't
Mars
know.
girl.
But so 30 Seconds to Mars was performing that night in London, the day that Andrew had
Hmm.
disappeared. And HIM was performing, it was kind of like they were doing a signing at another
Oh.
location where I'm not sure if it was like an acoustic concert and a signing. I'm not entirely sure.
Hmm.
But that was just 2 or 3 days after Andrew's disappearance. So I think that would have been within
Okay.
that weekend that he
Hmm.
disappeared.
Hmm. Yes.
And 14-year-old in general, you're wanting more independence at 14.
Hmm.
So I get that, like, that's the theory in that he wanted more independence. He wanted to take the 2-hour train ride to London
Hmm.
and go to this show himself. But
Hmm.
I just feel like, based on what we know of Andrew's home life and his childhood, I don't
Hmm.
see that as super likely for a couple of reasons. The fact that his parents were willing to take him to these things,
Right. Yeah.
like willing to go on these trips and do these sorts of things with him. He was also
Hmm.
very close to his sister.
Okay.
And his sister, there's a lot of the articles where she's interviewed where she's just truly heartbroken that
That poor.
Andrew's decisions were made without consulting her or just talking to her, that she maybe could have helped, because we still don't
Yes.
know why Andrew left.
Right,
Like,
right.
what was he unhappy? Did he really want to do this alone? Like, we don't know.
Yeah. We do Charlotte was younger than him, right?
2 years
Or was
older.
she older? She was older. Okay. So this is exactly the same dynamic as my family. And I just can't imagine this poor sister who, I mean, my whole life it's been just the four of us in my family as well. One girl, one boy. I'm 3 years older than my younger brother. And I would feel exactly the same way if something happened
Yeah.
to my younger brother. Like, oh my God, I just wish he would have said something to me. I would have gone with him, or I would have, convinced him maybe that he should talk to mom and dad, like, I
Yeah,
feel so
it
bad.
seems weird to me.
Hmm.
And like again, the argument elaborates, like some people on Reddit and things, they say that like maybe he asked for more independence and his parents said no, or that
Hmm.
there was an attempt at compromising for more independence and Andrew didn't want to compromise. But I just I feel like my parents raised me and my sister in a similar way where my parents didn't say no a whole lot. And
Hmm.
if they did, it was like no until you figure this, and this out. Like if I wanted to go to a concert
Sure.
at the age of 14, I needed to present them essentially with a plan
Oh, yeah.
and like pitch it to them almost. And
Absolutely.
then they
Yeah,
would say
yeah.
yes because they know I thought through everything and I had a
Right.
plan. And I feel
Right.
like that's kind of what Andrew's parents would do. But I don't know. I
Yeah,
just think
yeah, it's
it's
hard.
weird that
It's hard to
this
say.
concert excuse actually is correct.
Yeah, I'm kind of with you. It just from the description of his family life, it seems like he wouldn't be afraid to approach his parents with an idea
Yeah,
like this.
and like we talked about this a little bit in the Aisha degree episode,
Mm,
but like what if they did have some sort of conversation about independence or whatever it could be. It could
mm,
truly be anything. And
mm,
Andrew didn't like what they had to say and they got in a big fight,
mm,
and that is kind of the catalyst that led to him wanting to leave, whether it was for a concert or anything else. My
mm,
thing with
mm.
that is at this point it has been so long since he disappeared. Don't you think that that information would have come out at some point? Like the
Yeah,
parents would say, yeah, we did have a fight and like we just want you to come
right.
home, we're sorry. Like they
Yes.
put a lot of public pleas together and that was never included.
Oh,
And I
yeah.
feel like
And
it would be.
I agree. Like, just based on how these parents are and how they've raised their children, I imagine if they put out any kind of public plea and there was an argument, they would be like, listen, it was just an argument. Please come home and we can resolve this. Like, or Charlotte would have
Yeah.
said something like, he did get in a fight with my parents, but it was no big deal. He could have come home, It's just
Yeah.
that one way ticket.
Yeah,
I
the one way
don't
ticket's
know.
really like that gets me. I don't know.
It gets me too.
Um
Like, why would he not want to return? But of course, I'm sure we're talking theories now, so maybe that'll get discussed a little
yeah.
bit.
Yeah, it's just confusing. But
Mm-hmm.
another theory is one that was brought up by Andrew's dad, and it's
Mm-hmm.
based off of a TV show called The Rise and Fall of Reginald Purin.
Okay.
And sorry for any spoilers, the show came out in 2009.
All right,
Sorry.
y'all. 2009.
Skip
Yeah,
ahead if you don't want to know.
if you were gonna watch
Um,
it, you probably would have watched it by now.
yes, but this is a dark comedy about a man who seemingly has everything, but he is still unhappy with his life. And so the show is really kind of going over his fantasies of kind of starting over or doing things differently. I've never
Mm-hmm.
watched it, but from the descriptions, it's like it surrounds something mundane in his life, and he kind of goes through these like fantastical things in his head of like how he would do things differently, and it's just a dark comedy.
Yeah.
And at the end of season one, the main character Reggie debates faking his death, and Kevin showed Andrew this show because he thought he'd find it funny. It was intellectual dark comedy for a 14-year-old kid.
Yeah.
And he was drawn to that plot line, and he thought that that plot line was incredibly funny. And that was kind of something like, like 14-year-olds like quoting a show over and over. Like that was his show that he would do that for. And that's made Kevin wonder if maybe Andrew wanted to reinvent himself by making himself disappear. And so like I get it, because like, yeah, you're trying to draw parallels to anything, but I think this goes back to the same conversation we just had with his home life. He was allowed to be whoever he wanted to be. He could have reinvented himself at home.
Yeah, absolutely. And his parents would have been probably really supportive of it because, like you said, when this time, 2007-ish, the goth aesthetic was not entirely embraced, and it was different. Not like it is today, where it's, I think, a little bit more common, and people, I think, care a little bit less about what other people are wearing. But they allowed him to do that. So if he wanted to change to something different, I'm sure they would have been receptive to it, or at least heard him out.
Yeah, so I wanted to mention it because Kevin brought it up himself, but I think that it's probably not accurate.
I don't know
theory, the third theory, which I think is much more likely, but I still have my reservations about it, is what if Andrew was going to meet somebody in London that no one else knew about? Could he have been talking to somebody online? A lot of people kind of blend this theory and the first theory, wondering if he was talking to somebody online, said they had tickets to that 30 Seconds to Mars show or something. I think that's more likely. But according to a Vice article, this theory went as far as the police removing the posters from his bedroom to check for fingerprints if someone potentially sent him that poster and touched it. Like, people were really looking into this. I know that they definitely checked all of his electronic communications. They checked his school. They checked the library that he went to frequently. They obviously checked the electronics at home. But, like, at home, they had just gotten that laptop for Charlotte, and that was their first home computer. They only had it for a couple of months, and it was Charlotte's. So they checked it. She handed it over immediately. They found nothing. They found nothing on his school computers. They found nothing at the local library, which he went to frequently. And they also, obviously they couldn't check the PSP, but they did contact Sony to say, like, hey, Sony, does he have an account that he's logging into this PSP for? Because that was one, like, really big thing about the PSP, is that you can go online with it and you can play online games against other people. But Sony said he didn't even have an account registered with them, and his parents say he didn't even have his own email address, like nothing. But my question is, like, could he have set up an email address that isn't tied directly to his name? Like, how easy is that? Honestly, I don't know, but I feel like it could be possible. And what if he had a Sony account with an unknown email,
right? Or an incomplete name. I don't know what it is like to register on a PSP. But I know that you can register for certain things online with just, like, your first name and like any email.
Well, that's exactly what's like. Could he have had a dummy email? Like, those are so easy to make, but I don't
Yeah.
know how forensic tracking actually can
Mm-hmm.
determine if it is his or not. Like, I know IP address and
Exactly.
everything is part of it, but I there I don't know really. Like,
That would
is that
be,
possible? But
yeah,
I
I
had a
don't
lot of
know.
questions specifically with the PSP. And I
Uh-huh.
talked to a friend of mine who he's had all sorts of consoles and stuff. He never
Mm.
had a PSP, but he had, I think he called it the Vice. I think it was the console, the portable console that came out after the PSP.
Okay.
So he gave me a little bit of insight because my questions were, I had a couple specific ones. I knew it had access to the internet, but
Mm-hmm.
is that access only to play online games, or do you have like Google? Do you have a browser? Do you
Yeah.
have that sort of access? And then I'm assuming this is Wi-Fi only access because cell
Yeah.
phones were in their early evolution at this point. Most
Mm-hmm.
cell phones didn't have internet at that point.
No, no.
So I don't imagine a
And
PSP would have internet
yeah, no,
everywhere without Wi-Fi.
no data, nights and weekends, bitch. Call me on nights and weekends.
Right?
Like, so he has nothing out there in this PSP without Wi-Fi. And
Yeah, and then
if he had gone somewhere with Wi-Fi, maybe somebody would have seen him, and maybe that's where the Pizza Hut thing came in. I don't know.
yeah, I don't know. I do know that they did eventually talk to somebody who was on the train with Andrew.
Oh,
Um,
okay.
and so obviously this is before the footage in King's Cross,
Mm-hmm.
and um, I think it was an elderly woman, but I could be wrong on that. But it was somebody who was
Mm-hmm.
on the train with them. Said that he was quiet, he was polite, but he sat there the whole time playing on his PSP
Mm-hmm.
on the whole
Yeah,
train
there you
ride.
go.
But one thing that I found very interesting, especially given that fact, is my friend who I was asking about these consoles. He
Mm-hmm.
said that it had absolutely terrible battery life. So the fact that he
Oh,
didn't bring his charger with him and he was playing it
mm-hmm.
on a 2 hour train ride
Yeah.
is very interesting.
Sorry,
Right?
Strickle.
You heard him?
Meow. I heard a meow. Um,
He
yeah.
just
So
jumped
yeah,
on my lap.
if if you're playing for 2 hours, that thing probably got hot and lost battery.
Yeah. And so it's like, is it an oversight that he left his charger
Yeah.
behind? Or did he plan on coming back, but then he didn't buy the return ticket?
Yeah.
It's so
Uh,
bizarre, and I just can't
yeah.
understand it.
Yeah. I can't get past the return ticket thing that there
The
was
return,
no
like, I
return.
just keep coming back to it. I
Yeah.
don't understand.
Yeah, I don't understand why. I mean, I understand being 14. Like, it's a very tenuous time. But I just don't understand why he wouldn't have wanted to return to his family. And I get that the dad was like, oh, well, maybe took this plot line from TV and he wanted to restart. But I just am hung up on that. Like, why would you not want to just round trip it? If you were going to see a concert, see the show, sneak back before your parents find out that you're gone. You know? I
Yeah,
don't know.
and I
If
think
that's what he was
this
trying to
is
do.
where this is where that potential other person communication theory, I to me, kind of comes in, but it's 100% speculation because it's like,
Hmm.
okay, if you're trying to convince this kid, whether it is genuine or not, that's not even the part that I'm debating right now. You're trying to
Hmm.
convince this kid to buy himself a train ticket, come all the way to London
Right.
for potentially a concert or whatever excuse you're giving him. And then maybe it's like, "Oh, I'll drive you home afterwards."
Right.
And that's like
Right.
that. Maybe that's where he's so confident he doesn't need a return ticket because he
Oh,
has plans with this other person. Again, whether it's genuine or not, and
that's a good
to
point.
drive him home.
That's a good point. Somebody could have offered that. But again,
Like I
yeah,
feel like
like
he had confidence in that decision not to get the ticket.
yeah. Yeah, he had
So
to
there had to
he
be a
had
reason why he had that confidence. And to
absolutely.
me, that seems the most logical. It seems more logical than the TV show Restarting Your
Mhm.
Life.
Mhm.
I think
Mhm.
I think even at 14 years old, you realize how hard that actually is to do.
Oh yeah. And
And with only
I
200 pounds, like you need a lot more money than that if you want to restart your life. I don't know.
yeah, and I think that you're so right that there had to have been some kind of motivating factor for him to not buy
Mm-hmm.
that round trip ticket. Like somebody, some plan to get a ride home or to do something that would have given him that confidence to not get that round
Yeah.
trip ticket.
Yeah, and I don't know what it is.
I don't either.
But
Oh my gosh.
unfortunately, things went quiet in Andrew's case for quite a while. A
Oh.
little over a year after his disappearance, a BBC news article that was published on November 27th, 2008, mentions a man in Leominster who went to Leominster police and said that he had information on Andrew Gosden.
Mm.
So this is kind of an interesting kind of situation here, because according to this article, this man came forward on November 26th, and I
Mm.
think it was late evening, but he
Mm.
went to this police station, and this police station is about 150 miles from where Andrew lived with his family, and
Okay.
about 140 miles away from London. So it's kind of like they make
Hmm.
this triangle.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
obviously, it's not close to either location that we know that
Yeah.
Andrew had been at some point. But the way that he went to the police station, and I think it was late in the evening, if not like really late at night. But there was
Right.
nobody actually like working the main counter when you walk
Mhm.
in. So you actually had to like talk through an intercom from the street
Okay. All right.
to get a hold of any police. So this
Right.
man goes up
So.
to this intercom at this police station on the street and
Mhm.
says, "I have information on Andrew Gosden."
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
obviously the police are
Very
like
specific.
looking it up and being like, "Oh, he's a missing kid. We need to go talk to this guy." So an
Oh
officer goes
yeah.
outside to speak with him, and this person's gone.
Oh my gosh. I mean,
And so
that
it's like in
officer
these
had to.
moments that
That
happen.
officer had to have known like right away. Like, oh, Andrew Gosden. That's that young boy. Like I'm
Well,
sure
no,
that
they're
that
so far
officer
away,
went
they
right out
probably had to
there.
look it up. I
Oh,
think
you're
that they
right.
had like this
Yeah,
is so far from London and from Doncaster that
you're
like
right.
they probably
Yeah.
had to look it up. It could have been a couple minutes, but understandably they had to like they need to figure out
Right.
what's going on. So
Right.
still
Right.
like they got out there as fast as they could because there's some person
Right.
standing out there. You're not going to keep some guy waiting even if you don't know all the details,
No,
but he's
yeah.
gone. So the
That
police
is
make the
crazy.
public pleas for this man to come forward and tell them what he knows about Andrew.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
after this encounter, Andrew's story was featured on the BBC show, the One Show. I think it's
Mhm.
kind of like a talk show. I'm honestly not entirely sure. But
Okay.
after that aired, someone wrote a letter into the police saying that they were the person who went to the police station and had information. And he said that he saw Andrew in Leominster, but had no further
Hmm.
information. So it's again like, why? Okay, now this is weird.
Hmm.
Andrew is
Yeah.
hundreds of miles from either place he's
Yeah.
confirmed to be in.
Yeah. That's that's odd, and I don't I don't know. For some reason, it gives me a little bit of the Mark Carr confession to the JonBenet Ramsey
Right.
killing. You know, it
Yeah, and
gives
I will
me
say,
a
like,
little
there's
bit of
been
that.
no confirmation that the letter writer and the person at the police station are the same person.
Yeah, yeah, that's
So
true.
the police can't, they like don't know anything else. They haven't found any
Ugh,
additional evidence that he's in Leominster. So it's like they
that
just this
sucks.
happened.
Yeah, they're like, oh man, so I guess we just write this down? Like, what now? That sucks.
Yeah. So unfortunately, this would lead to the case stalling again.
Ugh.
On November 4th, 2009, so this is about 2 years after the disappearance,
Mhm.
Kevin actually went to a Muse concert and
Oh,
he was handing out flyers of Andrew,
what a good
thinking that, like,
idea.
if there was any possibility he'd have a chance to see Muse for a second time, Andrew would want to
Mhm.
go after knowing how much
Mhm.
he loved that first concert.
Mhm. Mhm.
And he thought that if Andrew had the ability to see him, like, he's gonna go, so maybe Kevin could
Right.
just spot him in the crowd or hand out flyers and someone else will.
Mhm.
He was so desperate and so heartbroken over Andrew's disappearance that
Oh.
he needed to do anything that he could.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
unfortunately, within the first 2 years of his disappearance, Kevin had attempted suicide and
Oh.
was required to essentially quit his job due to his depression.
Oh, this
And
poor man.
yeah, at that point, he basically dedicated himself to attempting to find Andrew.
Oh, like, and I understand totally, like, his idea here. Like, maybe some of these people were at that concert that night. Maybe
Absolutely.
they saw him. Maybe he's here now. Like, oh, it's heartbreaking
Yeah,
that
well, there's
he
really
was
little
so.
information. You're just trying to, like,
Mhm.
find what would fit in Andrew's personality and go to it. See if
Right,
there's
do
any
whatever
chance
you
he'd want to
can.
go. Yeah.
Yeah, it sounds like he was just doing whatever he could.
Mm-hmm.
And it's so heartbreaking that, I mean, I totally, I don't want to say I understand it, but it's his only son. Like, it doesn't
Yeah.
surprise me that this drove him into a depression.
Yeah, and we've talked a lot about kind of what the family life was like, and to me,
Hmm.
it seems like both Kevin and Glennis are just proud of their children, and
Yeah.
losing one of them, and especially losing them with so much unknown, has to be
Ugh.
so heart-wrenching.
That has to be terrible. I mean, we've talked about it before on this show with the disappearances and that kind of thing. And I'm sure this might happen soon, but just the thought of a family having to eventually accept that maybe their loved one is in fact dead or never coming home.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
Yeah.
that's awful. So awful.
Yeah. So in 2011, Kevin began working with a private firm to do a sonar search of the Thames River.
Hmm.
And I think many of us who are interested in true crime know that it is not at all uncommon to find a missing person in some sort of water source.
Hmm. Hmm.
So this seemed like a fairly logical decision to
Yeah.
attempt to search the Thames. It's a huge
Hmm.
task,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
there's so many different scenarios that could lead to somebody's body being found in water that it
Hmm.
makes sense that they would go in this
Yeah.
direction.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, nothing was found, at least in relation to Andrew. They actually did find
Damn it.
another body during
Oh
this
God.
search. Wasn't
Oh
Andrew's,
Lord.
but it hopefully brought closure to
Some family.
somebody else's
Imagine,
family who's missing their loved one.
imagine being the worker that day. Like, oh my God, I
Right.
just found another problem. I didn't
Well,
solve the first
I'm
problem, but
thinking
I found
about it.
another one.
When I was in London, um, because the Thames follows tide,
Mm-hmm.
and
Yes.
it's you can actually climb down into the banks of the Thames when it's low tide, and
Mm-hmm.
I did that. when I was there, and
Ooh.
we went like scavenging for stuff. So I have
Clamming?
a whole bag of like Victorian china chips from the Thames.
Cool. Well,
Yeah,
because
I
if
want to
I,
make it into some sort of art piece, but I have a whole bag of
yeah,
different chips from China from like the mid to late 1800s. And it's
that
these
is
beautiful
so,
patterns and all sorts of stuff. So I'm like thinking about like I've been down in the banks of the Thames. Like
yeah. And
just
now,
imagine.
catch me up if you know, because isn't the Thames? It's a particularly deep river, isn't it? Like when the tide is
I
in.
believe so. Yeah, like the tide really goes down. Like there's a
Yeah, yeah,
lot
yeah.
of water that comes from the tide.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, we were there. We were there at like 8 a.m. I feel like it was early in the morning, and
Okay,
it was a typical London day, very
sure.
misty and foggy and chilly,
Yeah,
but
yeah,
it was a
yeah,
ton of fun. It was really cool to
yeah.
kind of see the city from down on the banks of the Thames. Not a
Well,
typical view you get.
that's so cool. Also, that's another picture you should grab for our social media of like your Victorian chips from the river if they're easily
I will have
accessible to
to say
you.
they're probably in a storage locker.
I was gonna say they might not be easily accessible to you,
I might
but
have pictures from that
from
day. I'll have to look and see if I have pictures from that day. Um,
from from what I understand or have read, I don't know much about it. I always was under the impression that the Thames was like a deep, fast moving river.
it's definitely
But that
fast
doesn't really.
moving.
Okay, okay.
It's quite wide. It's a big
Right.
river.
Right, but it's not as fast moving and like deep as I thought because they did find a body down there. I
They
thought it was
did.
so deep and fast moving that like if you threw a body in the Thames, it was very unlikely you would find it. But I mean, they did
Well, who
find
knows where that body
someone.
went in the water? I didn't look up any details
Hmm.
about that body. It could have been from
Oh,
miles away. Who knows?
oh yeah, yeah,
Um,
yeah.
so
But they did find
jumping
someone. So,
ahead, 6 years later in 2017,
hmm.
10 years after Andrew's disappearance, a tip came into
Wow.
the police. This tip
Oh.
was from somebody who I believe has remained anonymous. I honestly haven't dug too deep into who this person might be, but a lot of the news sources just kind of don't even acknowledge whether this person's anonymous or not. They just say a tip came in. So I'm going to
Hmm.
just make
Hmm.
that assume it's somebody anonymous, and I'm not going to dig.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah, yeah,
their
yeah,
identity doesn't really matter. But this
yeah.
person says that they were chatting with somebody online who went by the name Andy Rue. And Andy Rue talks about their partner had just left and that they needed money to help cover their rent. Andy Rue was asking for £200, and he told the tipster that he didn't have a bank account because he ran away when he was 14. He elaborated a little
Hmm.
bit further on this, saying that he left home just because he wanted to. So,
Huh.
obviously, investigators wanted to figure this out, and they quickly contacted
Yeah.
the website where this person was talking with Andy Rue.
Hmm.
And it sounds like it was kind of a chat room type of thing. And
Yeah.
unfortunately, the website had recently gone through this big internal overhaul and updated its systems. And
Oh.
during this update, it lost a lot of data,
No.
including the user data and any information that they could have offered about Andy Rue.
Uh,
So just terrible timing. But,
yeah.
and this seems fairly random, but obviously, kind of the details generally make sense. But
Hmm.
what's more convincing about it is as a kid, Andrew's parents would call him Rue. So
Oh.
Andy Rue kind of seems like it could be a potential username.
Hmm.
And that makes me wonder,
Yeah.
could he have been using Andy Rue back in the day
Hmm.
and no one just really knew?
Yeah.
And it didn't like set off any red flags or anything to look deeper into?
Hmm.
I don't know, but the fact
Yeah.
that this person said that he left home at 14 and just because he wanted to, it kind of seems like that might be Occam's razor answer to Andrew's disappearance. Like, just as simple
Yeah.
as that. But I still don't understand. But
Right.
obviously, that's the simplest answer.
Right. Right. And like, ah, we we don't want to accept that people, young people, would just want to leave their families and run away without even letting them know or start a new life, but it does happen. So it
Mm-hmm.
absolutely could have happened here. And
Yeah.
I wonder how much they were able to well, I guess they lost all that data, so they weren't able to trace it. I wonder if this username Andy Rue has like appeared again recently, or if they have like a
At
flag
least at
on
the
it.
time, I never saw any additional information. So I would assume no. Or if it did, police aren't really talking about it.
Okay.
But um, like I mentioned this a little bit earlier, but Angie's disappearance reminds me a lot of Aisha Degree's disappearance. Both Andrew and Aisha left home on their own accord. That's something that we confidently know in both
Right.
cases. They both had some sort of plan or destination in place. And one thing I wonder in both cases are kind of what I was mentioning earlier is what sort of conversations were happening in the home before the disappearance. And it may
Yeah.
seem like just innocuous to parents or siblings. It might really just be something very random, but in a teenager or pre-teenager's mind state, it could be something that is so completely different and extreme that it could lead to them making some drastic decisions.
Yeah.
And so I really wonder really what those conversations were like. I'm sure the police went over it all with the families. And I don't want to say that, like, with all of this, it's the fault of families if some conversation led either one of them to leave the home, because you never know how teenager is going to react to something that to an adult is incredibly logical and fair.
Oh yeah.
That maybe they just
Yeah.
thought that, like, oh, this is terrible. I need space. I need my own time. I want to leave. I wonder if that's the case in either one of these. But it's so common to have a normal conversation be taken negatively. I think we still see that every
Yeah.
single day on social media. Like, we're used to that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And when you're dealing with like a preteen, there's no way to tell really what direction their mind took what you said, no matter how
Exactly.
carefully you said it.
Yeah. So let's jump ahead to 2021
Wow.
because unfortunately, nothing else really happens in this case, and it went cold in those next couple of years again. So in December of 2021, something did happen. And this was something that I felt like came out of nowhere. I have been following this case since, or maybe around 2018, I think is the first time I heard about it. And when this hit the news, I was so blown away. Two men were arrested in connection to Andrew's disappearance. One of the
Oh.
suspects was 45 and was charged on suspicion of kidnapping, human trafficking, and possession of indecent images of children.
Oh my God.
The second suspect was 38 years old and was arrested on suspicion of kidnapping and human trafficking. What really confuses me, and this is going to confuse you as much as it confuses me, is these charges don't directly relate to Andrew. And all of the articles say that these two men that were arrested in connection to his disappearance. But there's no real evidence of this.
Okay.
Yeah, it's really weird. But it's like you go and read an article and it's like 2 men arrested in disappearance of 2007 14-year-old.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it's like you
But like
read what they're arrested for and they never state that like they think that Andrew was trafficked. They just state men were arrested for these reasons.
right. All terrible, terrible reasons. And
Yes.
things that could have happened to Andrew, which we don't want to think happened to Andrew. But odd that they don't mention him
Yeah.
specifically.
So I turned to Reddit. You know me, I kind of like to stay off of Reddit. I do think that there's a lot of times some really great opinions that come from Reddit. Actually, in the next case I'm going to present, I did a lot of Reddit stuff on there, but it's another like incredibly baffling case. So I kind of like to turn to him when I feel very stuck to see if there's somebody who has kind of either the same opinion as me where they don't know either, or something that can kind of help put my mind on the right path. But I will tell you, Reddit was
Right.
as confused as I am. Like, no one quite
Yeah.
understands. The rumor is that the investigation into these men started after an anonymous tip came in. Again, I don't have confirmation of this. This is just kind of random things that I've read on Reddit. We don't know what this tip is. We don't even have the official confirmation that this tip happened. And what's even more confusing about all of this is that the men were released. And in September of 2023, so about 2 years after the initial arrest announcement, investigators said that neither one of these men had anything to do with Andrew's disappearance.
What?
So it's like, did the media just run with this? And like
Yeah.
everyone reported it? Was there's something to it? I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. Did they say, okay, no, it said that they were released, so they weren't convicted on any
I think
of these
charges were dropped. Yeah.
Wow. Wow. So it does sound
So
like the media just ran with it.
Yeah, I'm curious to why investigators initially believed that the 2 men could have been involved, if they did believe that. Because none of these articles had any details. Is it possible that Andrew was kidnapped and human trafficked? Well, unfortunately, yeah, it's possible. But what sort of information was found 14 years after his disappearance that led investigators to announce this to the media?
Yeah.
Like, is there really a connection? Like, obviously it could be. It could be part of that whole theory we were talking about earlier, where someone lured him out through like online conversation or something, or promised him he had concert tickets. That very possibly could have been human trafficking.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
But what evidence is there? I'm sure there's evidence that
There's-
the police know
yeah.
that we don't. But
I'm
it's just
sure-
that
yeah.
whole thing was so weird. And I remember
That
like
is
reading,
so
saying
weird.
like seeing that these 2 people were arrested and just being blown away and being like, well, I kind of get it, because that fit that one theory so well that everyone kind of had in the back of their head. But then to see that there's no real connection, and like you could tell immediately reading these articles when they came out in 2021 that like how are they connected? Like, we're assuming that they're implying that Andrew was trafficked. But
yeah. Yeah.
tell me some of the proof and how you came to this decision.
Right.
So I don't know. It very much confused me.
Yeah, that's very confusing. Like it sounds like somebody really jumped the gun and then the media really ran with it. But but like you said, they didn't specify his name anywhere.
Yeah,
In
and
those-
like there's also the argument. Some of the argument that people say is like maybe police did find contact with Andrew. Like maybe they did, and at this point he's an adult. And he says
Yeah.
he doesn't want contact with his family. That's possible as well. But usually the police come out and say he's been removed from the missing persons list.
Yeah.
No further information at this
Absolutely.
time or something like that.
Right. The
That didn't
police would
happen.
say the case is closed or something, like
Yeah.
something.
So I've mentioned already a couple times, this reminds me so much of Aisha Degree because we had the same general theory that she was potentially communicating with somebody to create a plan, leave her home, and potentially meet up with this person. And I think the same theory applies here, as we've kind of mentioned. And I think that there's a good possibility that they were talking to somebody and had online accounts that no one really knew about. Aisha maybe a little less so. We talked a lot about that in that episode. She was,
Yeah.
10 or 11 in 2001 when she disappeared.
Yeah.
I think that potentially is less likely, but I do think that there's a good possibility that Andrew could have had accounts that no one really knew about in 2007 as a 14-year-old.
Yeah. Yeah, like
And
a
especially
burner account.
especially if the PSP had internet capabilities where he could go online and chat with somebody. Like, I don't even know, maybe there are some games where there's like a chat room option, even if it's not like a web browser, that he could have met somebody on.
Yeah.
But like, again, Sony said he didn't have an account with their system. Are they checking that device? Are they able to find like the serial number and access that device remotely? Again, I have no idea.
Yeah.
But it's just, this case is so incredibly baffling.
Yeah.
But then, like, again, if they're going down the human trafficking route, you would think that there has to be some sort of communication.
Yeah.
Like,
Exactly. Yeah.
there is the possibility that he left wittingly, potentially with this idea to go to the concert alone, whatever idea it may be, just kind of using that as an example. And along the way, he was kidnapped. That's possible as well.
Yeah. Maybe after
But
he
that's
left
so
King's
many
Cross.
different situations and scenarios that have to combine perfectly to make that happen.
Yeah.
I don't know. What are your thoughts?
Well, so a lot of this is giving me reverberations of the modern day Delphi case, just with talking to people online that you don't necessarily know who's on the other end, and being a younger child and seeking more independence might lead you to conversations like that where you're incredibly vulnerable, but you don't realize it even though you're really a smart kid,
Right. Well, I think this was at the time, too, where we didn't know as much of the dangers of the internet back then.
No.
Back then, chat rooms were still very popular.
Oh, yeah.
Like,
yeah.
nowadays, like, it's so weird to me that we've made this transition into, like, stranger danger on the internet, but everyone
Right.
is still talking to strangers. Like, we order Ubers to get in a car with a stranger.
Yep.
But we're still preaching stranger danger. Like, the world has just evolved in a very different way. But at that time, it was like the cool thing to do, like talk online to people that you've never met. And
absolutely, yeah. It was definitely considered the cool thing to do. So it would have made sense if he was maybe on. I know that a lot of those online games have chat boxes on them.
That's what I'm thinking.
Yeah. I know that they're not like necessarily like emails or messages or things like that because they like live inside the game, I think. But I know that there are ways to chat with like other players on your team. So potentially he was playing with someone who had bad intentions for him, found out that he was a young child, and wanted to traffic him. I don't know. I had hope when the guys were arrested, and then to hear they were released, I was like, damn, like,
Yeah.
because it fits so perfectly what could have happened to him, which I don't
Exactly.
want to have happened to him. I obviously want him to be like living in London under a different name, whatever it is. I hope he's out there. I hope he's happy. I hope he makes contact with his family so that his father and mother and sister can like end their suffering of worrying about him. But this is a weird one.
It's so weird.
It's a weird one. I I didn't know the details at all. I definitely knew the last name. But yeah, I did not know the details, and huh. Just
Yeah,
seems
it's
so
like I
odd.
don't understand. I really
Yeah,
don't.
and like, and since his disappearance, like, if he was not trafficked or kidnapped or murdered, why hasn't anyone resembling him like appeared on CCTV footage or like an age
Just in
progression
general.
photo?
Yeah, there
Yeah,
are age progression photos. We're gonna put them on our Instagram. We'll also have
cool.
like phone numbers and things to potentially report
Mm-hmm.
any information you may have. And one odd
Right.
thing, which I think is obviously it's something that would stand out, but to the average person, they just might not notice for a while.
Mm.
But he did have this um, kind of disformity with his ear, kind of the
Mm.
upper like cartilage of his ear was slightly disformed, and it kind of like was
Mm-hmm.
a wave. We can
Okay.
post pictures of that as well, where it's like he wore at 14 he wore his hair a little bit longer. So you might not have
Mm-hmm.
ever even seen it because his hair would be covering it. But if he did cut his hair short, it might be a little bit more noticeable. So we'll
Mm-hmm.
definitely include that in our Instagram so that you can kind of see what we're
Yeah.
referring to. But unfortunately, there's been no confirmed sightings. Like, there's people who say that they've
Wow.
spotted him all over the place, but absolutely nothing is
Mm-hmm.
confirmed. And
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
it's too difficult to really tell that at this point. And obviously, no one's come
Yeah.
forward saying, "Hey, I'm Andrew." Um,
Right.
so
I'll take a blood test. I can prove it.
mm-hmm,
You know.
exactly. So yeah, this is a bit of a baffling one.
Wow. Wow.
But
Yeah, and that they never declared him dead or anything like that. So that's very
no,
interesting. Like,
I've seen some reports similar to Lauren Spears' parents, where they're like, statistically, we understand
uh-huh.
what this means,
Yeah.
and that the fact that we haven't seen him since 2007
Mhm.
statistically means that we probably will never see him again, likely due to the
Right.
fact that he's no longer with us. But
Yeah.
they're not ready for that step, and I fully understand that. I get it.
Yeah.
Um, I
Yeah.
think that there are benefits to declaring somebody after a certain amount of time, but I think being
Mhm.
that the fact that it's your child, those benefits don't outweigh what you're doing.
Yeah, and
And I think that's fair.
I think just based on what his father is going through, no good can come from the police just declaring him dead. Like,
Correct.
I think that would just break his father, if not. I mean, this whole poor family has gone through so much, and yeah, I think it would do more harm than good.
Yeah, I agree. But thank you all for listening to Have You Heard About This Case. If you liked this episode, please leave us a review on Apple Podcasts, and you can also follow our show on Spotify. You can find us on Instagram at Have You Heard About This Case Pod, on TikTok at HYHATC, or you can email us at Have You Heard About This Case at gmail.com. Thanks, and we'll talk to you later.